Listen carefully, because I am about to tell you something no man alive was ever meant to hear. In the winter of 1889, in Richmond, Virginia, 94 souls walked willingly into a home that called itself a sanctuary. Every single one of them was gone within months, and the polite society of Richmond sealed their absence behind prayer, charity, and lies. The house still stands. Its basement walls 12 inches thick and slick with lime were built not to keep danger out, but to keep the truth in. They called her Mrs. Bridget Kelly, a widow, a God-fearing woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that softened in the light of candlelit prayer. She was the perfect Christian hostess, endorsed by the Methodist Church itself, entrusted with ministers, missionaries, and the devout. But what the congregation saw as kindness was something else entirely. You will not hear this in history books. You will not find it in tourist brochures. The original police report number 1889-112 was sealed by the mayor himself. The Methodist elders ordered it destroyed, and those who insisted on speaking of it were labeled unstable, disloyal, or damned. Because this was never just a murder story. It was a method, a system, a quiet machinery of disappearance that worked so perfectly, it erased nearly 100 people without a single witness coming forward at least, not one the city allowed to live in peace. And here's the first truth you need to understand. Real evil does not come with a knife in the dark. It comes with tea and scripture. It looks you in the eye, says, "You are safe here," and means something entirely different. Mrs. Kelly didn't simply kill. She converted. She reshaped minds until her guests no longer wanted to leave. Until the idea of returning to their former lives felt like an act of betrayal against their own souls. She didn't take them by force, she took them by choice. Tonight, I'm going to tell you how she did it, and why powerful men buried it. But I'll warn you now, once you understand her method, you'll begin to see it everywhere. In boardrooms, in politics, even in your own home. The question is, once you recognize it, will you still be able to trust the people offering you comfort? Or will every warm welcome feel like the first step into Mrs. Kelly's boarding house? They say the devil hides in plain sight. In Richmond of 1888, that devil wore an apron and poured tea from a porcelain pot. The city was still healing from the Civil War's ruin, its people desperate for symbols of moral order. The Clay Street Methodist Church became that anchor, and Mrs. Kelly became its darling. She had the air of a woman who'd suffered loss yet carried on with grace. Her husband, dead from consumption. Her only son, gone in a rail accident. She told her story softly, the way a hymn floats over the pews, until pity became trust. When she opened her boarding house at 1247 Marshall Street, she claimed it was for godly travelers who deserved rest and safety in a sinful world. Ministers, missionaries, widows all found their way there, and all felt a peculiar pull to remain longer than intended. The rooms were spotless. The food was rich. Evening Bible readings by lamplight gave the house a glow of holy purpose. But listen closely. The first stage of her method wasn't hospitality. It was containment. She observed every guest like a scientist studies a specimen, learning their fears, their losses, the words that made them lean forward in conversation. She remembered the smallest details and repeated them back days later, as if she alone truly understood them. In that way, she rewrote their loyalties, severing them from the outside world, binding them to her. Neighbors began noticing how visitors rarely left. But in that age, privacy was sacred, and suspicion toward a pious widow was nearly blasphemy. She hosted sewing circles, baked for charity events, and had the Reverend himself vouch for her. By the spring of 1889, she had a full house and not one guest with any urgency to depart. That is when the second stage began. It started with the smallest restrictions. Guests were encouraged to stay in for prayer rather than attend outside services. Letters home were kindly proofread before mailing. Mrs. Kelly insisted it was to avoid distressing the family with tales of ill health or melancholy. Meals were prepared to exact portions, with tea blends she claimed aided sleep and soothed the nerves. And then came the tonic. A cloudy, amber liquid poured from small brown bottles kept in her apron pockets. She called it her restorative. Guests claimed it eased their headaches, helped them sleep, lifted their spirits. No one knew the formula, only that she insisted on measuring it herself. Over weeks, it dulled the edge of thought, softened the will, and made even the most restless guest oddly docile. She had learned this recipe years earlier while working for an Episcopal rector in Lynchburg. One ingredient extracted from a flower was used in rural asylums to keep violent patients calm. Another was an opiate derivative, delivered in doses too small to cause alarm, but enough to build dependency. The transformation was subtle. Eyes lost their brightness. The need for conversation faded. Time seemed to dissolve for them. And when a guest's body finally weakened from the tonics, from isolation, from a deliberate thinning of meals, Mrs. Kelly would speak to them about the beauty of eternal rest. She framed it as a gift. The Lord calls some of us early, dear. It's a blessing to go without suffering. By midsummer, 3 guests had vanished. The Reverend announced from the pulpit that they had moved on to serve the Lord elsewhere. But no letters came. No goodbyes were heard. The rooms were quickly filled with new guests. The basement was the final stage. It was stone-walled, cool year-round, and could be locked from the outside. Officially, it stored food and supplies. In truth, it was where Mrs. Kelly perfected her method. When a guest became too weak to leave their bed, she'd invite them for a special supper in the basement, claiming it was warmer there in winter, cooler in summer. There, she would serve tea sweetened heavily, almost cloyingly, masking the bitterness of the final dose. She would sit beside them, reading psalms in a low, steady voice until the cup was empty. And then, as the opiate pulled them under, she'd rest her hand on theirs and whisper, "You're going home now." The bodies were never buried in a churchyard. Lime pits beneath the floorboards kept the odor from traveling. The stone walls absorbed the damp, the silence, the secret. But you must understand, this was more than murder. This was ritual. Each step from welcome to loyalty to dependency to surrender was designed to erase resistance. She did not just kill them. She made them choose to die. What the public never knew is how high the connections went. Reverend Whitman had political ambitions, and scandal would have ended him. The Methodist elders saw Mrs. Kelly as a symbol of their charitable power. And the mayor's brother had once been a guest in her home, one who returned from an illness singing her praises. When rumors began, sparked by Emma Ashford's desperate visit, the machinery of protection activated. Records were sealed. Officers were warned off the case. Newspapers printed polite explanations. Travelers have moved on. Illness claimed them on the road. Families notified privately. Meanwhile, Mrs. Kelly kept working. By the end of 1889, 94 guests had passed through her doors. None were buried under their own names. This is where I need you to listen like your life depends on it, because it might. The method she used is still in play today. The tools are different, but the architecture is the same. Isolate, weaken, indoctrinate, remove. First, offer sanctuary from a chaotic world. Second, filter information until they accept only your version of reality. Third, provide something they believe they can't live without, even if it's slowly killing them. And finally, reframe surrender as salvation. This is not just history. This is the skeleton key to psychological control, whether it's a religious leader, a politician, or the smiling host of a corporate retreat. And the moment you see it, you cannot unsee it. Emma Ashford was the only one who came close to exposing her. She had seen the locked doors, smelled the sweet rot in the air, and heard the muffled moans. But when she returned with police, the rooms were scrubbed, the odor gone, the beds perfectly made. Mrs. Kelly smiled for the officers, served them tea, and implied Emma's nerves were failing her. The police left. Emma was humiliated. And within weeks, she, too, was gone, last seen entering the boarding house after making peace with Mrs. Kelly. Her body was never found. By spring of 1890, the boarding house was sold quietly. The new owner was told it had plumbing issues in the basement. He filled it in with concrete. But anyone who spent a night there swore they felt the temperature drop near the old kitchen door, and that faintly, beneath the scent of coal and wood, they could smell something sweet. Here is where I want you to take part in this descent. To prove you are not just a listener, but one of the few who understand what I'm telling you. I want you to comment exactly twice the words, "I see the pattern." Write it, and let the algorithm know you're not afraid to face the hidden structure behind history's darkest acts. Mrs. Kelly lived out her days quietly, never charged. She died in 1912, buried in a Methodist plot with a verse on her headstone. "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." The irony is so perfect it almost feels intentional. Her method was rediscovered in fragments by criminologists, cult deprogrammers, and intelligence agencies. They gave it new names, refined the steps, scaled it for entire populations. But the core, the way it dismantles the mind from the inside out, is exactly what she practiced in that house. Think about the last time you were told you were safe by someone in authority. Think about how comfort makes you stop asking questions. That's the first sip of the tea. History calls her a footnote if it calls her anything at all. But the truth is, Bridget Kelly is one of the most effective psychological operators America has ever produced. She didn't need chains. She didn't need threats. She needed only your trust. If you remember nothing else from tonight, remember this. The face of danger you fear is never the real threat. The real threat is the one who makes you grateful to be in their hands. And somewhere, in the polite archives of Richmond, there is still a box marked 1889 to 112. Inside, the ledger of names, 94 of them, each a man or woman who walked into a sanctuary and never returned. If you ever find it, you will understand that this story is not about the past. It is about the moment you let your guard down, and the moment someone offers you comfort for the last time.